Hello and good morning from sunny California to all our viewers. I am Lila Taylor, the Chief Business Officer of Demy-Colton, and on behalf of Demy-Colton and the Demy-Colton team and our partners for this exclusive salon, Biotech Digital Partnering, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 44th installment of the Demy-Colton Virtual Salon Series. As usual, we welcome all past participants back and all of you who are joining us for the very first time. Demy-Colton's mission is to convene healthcare industry leaders to catalyze change. And we do this through in-person events, including BioFuture, our CEO summits, our virtual salon, such as the one today, and Biotech Showcase. The topic of today's salon is What's on the Horizon, Reflections, Projections, and Earnest Hopes. Before we start the salon, I'd like to introduce Patrick Frey, founder and CEO of Venture Valuation, as well as Biotech Digital Partnering, located in Zurich, Switzerland, who would also like to say a few words. Patrick?
Lila, thanks very much, and welcome everybody to this very interesting session about what's happening, what's on the horizon for this year and the future of biotech. I think it's a very exciting time. And we are always very pleased to work with Demy-Colton on these virtual salons. And we run the Biotech Digital Partnering event. So it's a full week event where we provide partnering opportunities, virtual partnering opportunities. So for anybody who has not participated or yet in the past, I can just encourage you to also use that and try to do deals and talk to people all around the world. Again, thanks all the panelists as well and all the participants. And I'm looking forward to a very interesting panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Just some housekeeping notes before I turn the virtual mic over to the moderator. The salon will start with a 50 to 55-minute discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A session. Also note the salon is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Now today's salon. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Karen Carey, Managing Editor of BioWorld, and she will be joined today by 4 panelists. Raquel Jacques, President and CEO of Aari Therapeutics, David Jenkins, Vice President, Head of Research and External Innovation at Ipsen, Tim Oppler, Managing Director, Global Healthcare Group of Stifel, and Peter Rubin, Executive Director of No Patient Left Behind. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn the virtual podium over to Karen. I will return during the Q&A session.
Thanks, Lila. I really appreciate being a part of this salon. I think we do have a great group today, and it should be a lively discussion. At BioWorld, we have covered and analyzed the biopharma industry for more than 30 years, and it's been a bit of a wild ride, especially through the pandemic. But we are starting to see some things normalize, which is good news. Our data show that deals, licensings, collaborations, and joint ventures reached about $218 billion in value in 2023, the highest amount in all recent years, and that the number of deals worth $1 billion or more is also climbing, reaching an 8-year high in the fourth quarter of 2023. M&A values, $140 billion last year, were up 80% over 2022, despite FTC challenges. And financings collectively raised $71 billion for the industry in 2023. That's 17% above the previous year, and the third highest amount behind 2020 and 2021. Today, we'll take a look at the economy, financings, M&As, licensing deals, and of course, any challenges, but also opportunities that arise in how we address pricing issues, IP protection, and geopolitical concerns. We can't fully see into the future, but we do have a historical perspective and some educated knowledge. So to kick things off, I thought I'd ask each of the panelists to tell us a bit about themselves and what is it that you think could have the biggest impact on the biopharma industry in 2024. Maybe we could start with Tim.
Great. Thank you very much, Karen. My name is Tim Oppler. As Lila said, I'm an investment banker with Stifel. I'm also kind of armchair economist, so I have a PhD in economics, and I will often make prognostications about the biopharma industry. So for me, this session is great fun.
Well, Rochelle, how about you?
Hi, thanks, Karen. Rochelle Jacques, CEO of Aari Therapeutics, and happy to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It should be a good and fun discussion. Just a little bit maybe about my background. I've done a number of leadership roles, running businesses, running companies across biopharma and biotech. My background is finance and commercial. And I spent about the last decade specifically focused in rare diseases. So I'm coming from things from that angle. And certainly as I think about predictions for 2024 and what might impact us the most, I think from a biotech chair, one of the things we're obviously watching carefully is, what is big pharma doing? Because it is very clear that from an investment standpoint, there is a lot of focus on wherever big pharma is focused. And so their actions and their words during 2024, I believe, are going to have a significant impact on capital allocation. So we're watching that carefully.
Okay. How about you, David?
Thanks, Karen. So yeah, I'm David Jenkins. I lead research and external innovation at Ipsen. Ipsen's a mid-sized pharma company. There's a long history in Europe and more recently in the US. At present, we're a global pharmaceutical company, around 5,000 people, around 3 billion in sales, split evenly across the US, Europe, and rest of the world. And we have a uniquely external innovation business model. So we source all of our pipeline of assets from external sources. We maintain all the capabilities that we need internally to do everything from research all the way through to global commercialization. Our business model is a little unique among other pharma businesses in that everything comes to us through business development activities. As we look into 2024, I think it's obviously an election year in the US, so we're certainly very interested to see how that's going to impact things over the summer as the campaigning really gets there. We're expecting more views on pharma pricing one way or the other, and we're also looking to see how the green shoots that we've believe we've observed coming out of JP Morgan this year are going to then develop and blossom during the year.
Okay, thanks. And how about you, Peter?
Hi, good morning and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Peter Rubin, and I am Executive Director of No Patient Left Behind. I apologize, I've got a little frog in my throat today. Hopefully it'll clear over the course of the meeting. But No Patient Left Behind is an organization of investors, innovators, and patient advocates, really focused on 3 guiding principles. That 1, if a doctor prescribes a treatment and the insurer authorizes it, it should be affordable to the patient. That 2, that drug prices should not stay high for too long. And 3, that how do we ensure sufficient incentives remain in place for continued and robust biotech innovation? My background is on Capitol Hill, worked for the House and the Senate on major pieces of legislation, as well as big pharma and big insurance and small pharma. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. And I agree with what David said that, yes, this year's an election year. And, if you're a Democrat or Republican, doesn't necessarily mean a good outcome for biotech, depending on just the different policies that different folks have. But at the same time, there's also tremendous opportunity, particularly at the end of the year, to potentially fix some of the unintended consequences of the Inflation Reduction Act. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be getting to discussing that later in this discussion. But I wanted to start off talking about the economy and financings. Tim, in your weekly report, it was written that spring is definitely coming to the biotech market, that there are some encouraging signs. What can you tell us about the economy right now? Are things getting better?
Thank you very much. So just to give some context, we had the pandemic, the market really took off, and at least in biotech, it's a surprisingly prosperous time. And then as we came out of it, inflation reared its ugly head. So we've been through an unprecedented period for recent decades of inflation in the United States and also other countries. And what's happening now is inflation is coming under control because the Fed's been raising rates. Unfortunately, higher interest rates have not been good for biotech. So we've been through a very difficult time in biotech, 2023. So, one frequently discussed metric is the XBI. So the XBI hit 65 last October. It's not so long ago, 4 or 5 months? Yesterday, the XBI crossed 100. And so we're definitely in a recovery. When I wrote those words, spring is coming, it's just a month ago. In the last month, it's gotten into early summer. So things are getting pleasant and warm. If you're a, mid-size or large cap public biotech company, the smaller caps are still, depending on, where they are in different circumstances that are not as good. But this market is definitely recovering.
And what about IPOs? The first of this year, CG Oncology, they were trading up 96% the first day, and there was enthusiasm for some of the others as well. It was nothing like what we saw last year. So is this basically a sign that the IPO window is opening?
Yep, the IPO window is definitely opening. I will say that, the public markets overall are in a period of recovery, right? So what that means is, IPOs are a bit of a lagging indicator of a recovering market. And so the first 6 or 7 IPOs this year performed really well. And I think that does foretell more to come. But what's really cooking right now are follow-on offerings. So just this morning, I think there were 4 announced, and we're seeing exceptionally high follow-on offering volume at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I saw Viking and Janux both had public offerings announced today on positive data yesterday. Where are we with venture capital?
It's a great question. So, venture capitalists in general have been raising quite a bit of money through the pandemic. And actually, if you look at money raised by venture capital, it's actually down a reasonable bit this year. And so, fund flows into VCs from their LPs are also very much a lagging part of the market. And so one of the things we're seeing is, if you're a venture capitalist, say, sitting in Silicon Valley or London or wherever you might happen to be, that raising your next fund is going to be a little tougher than the last one. And so VCs are holding on to their money. What you never want to do as a VC is kind of run out of money, right? So they're holding on it. So the actual volume of venture privates is down actually pretty significantly over the last 12 months. I do think that will recover, but that will be a lagging recovery to the rest of the market.
Rochelle, why don't you take us through your company's history? How have you financed? How have you gone from point A to point B? And what were some of the challenges you came upon?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. We have not long enough to talk about all of the exciting times over the last couple of years for sure, but I could share a little bit about what we've been up to at Aari. So Aari is a public company. We're based out of London with a U.S. headquarters in Boston. We're focused on a lead asset that is actually a pretty interesting derived from the saliva of ticks. And it's a dual inhibitor of complement C5 and leukotriene B4, so two immune pathways. So we believe that has broad applicability. We're focused on lead program in phase 3 in a rare pediatric disease. And this is unfortunately one where, as so many are, no approved therapies, about 80% mortality in that population. So you can imagine we're pretty focused on trying to move that forward to hopefully an eventual registration. We also have an early stage program, preclinical, focused on a very different market, geographic atrophy. And so, when we look at, being a microcap, obviously has been a really interesting ride over these last couple of years. Like many other companies, the first thing that we did in 2022 is we looked at how could we really focus our cash on the most important things. And so we did narrow our pipeline and focus on those two programs. At the time, we had other programs in play, including a phase 3 and another in a derm program. But I'd say the theme of what we've really done over the last couple of years is less about the actual, tactics and strategy, and it's more about almost a mindset and a way of working. Tenacity is number one, and having a plan B for everything. It just, it seemed like it was really an era of, unprecedented, as Tim said. And what it meant is, and pretty quickly, we realized even the experts really didn't know what to do and how to navigate. And so, we just really had to create our own path. And so, tenacity, I'd say, real discipline, and also a lot of creativity. What we did from a financing standpoint is really we embarked on a series of what I call bite-sized financings. With an eye toward, continuing to be able to capitalize the company, move the programs forward, but do that in a way where we were, very, I would say, aware and careful of the impact on existing investors, given the high cost of capital. So over the course of about 15 months, we raised just over $21 million. And did that over a series of different financings. I think for a lot of microcap, we really faced navigating around and trying to avoid those toxic terms that are very well known in the market. And so, we feel good about being able to do that. And it's really quite boring stuff, but another layer of complexity, just, managing all of the things around NASDAQ rules and so on. And trying to find that path forward. Things that a lot of companies, really never had to think about in terms of, baby shelf and so on. So it's been, I would say, we continue to drive forward, trying to be practical about what we're doing, trying to, again, be creative. And, I guess it's probably not so different from anything in biotech ever, which it's always, there's never a dull moment. It's always an exciting time. There are always challenges. This was really just a couple of years of a different set of challenges.
David, at Ipsen, you look for external innovation. Is the financial structure of a company a major determining factor in your decision making? Do the investments and the quality of investors play into it?
So when we're looking to bring programs in, our primary driver is really around strategic fit and where we can add value to the potential partner. We tend to find that those are the best relationships that we can strike up, and within that we look for the right science, the right commercial potential, but then obviously the right financial structure, and then the right sort of actionability is something that we take seriously as well. But it's not a primary driver, but it often can influence how we might set up a deal, given the potential stability of the company that we might be working with, what their future needs might be. Does that mean that we do a pure license? Does it mean that we consider equity, if that's something that might work forward? And also thinking about potential deal structures of would an option make sense in the setting of the company may not have as much stability as one would like in the sort of current uncertain environment, versus structuring things in a different way. So we certainly do take it into account, and in general we look for what's important for us is that the science is really strong, the potential is strong, and the team really believe in what they're doing, really passionate, and really look like it's going to be a good partner to work with.
And Peter, no patient left behind's goal is to make medications affordable for everyone in America. But how do we do that when investors want returns on their investments? How does the industry still attract investments when there is constant pressure on pricing?
Absolutely, thank you. And we truly do believe that we all can achieve biotech affordability and innovation, that one does not have to come at the expense of the other. In terms of pricing pressure, I think you're really seeing it in three ways, which is one, the fact that PBMs and health plans simply are not passing on the value of their negotiation to the patient. Because of the lack of PBM reform, consumers are really seeing a coinsurance based off a fake list price, as opposed to the proper insurance, which either gives you a coinsurance based off of the actual net price, or even better, something where you have low out-of-pocket costs for prescribed treatments. So that inability for consumers to benefit from the savings of the marketplace is something that is causing tremendous pressure on the industry, and the insurers have done a very good job of blaming the drug industry versus the plan design. I think the second pressure that's out there is we still don't really know the full impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. As CMS has worked to implement the small molecule price setting process, they've done in a very strategic way that it's only 10 drugs, it's very mature drugs, and we still don't really know the full impact of over time of how aggressive CMS will be in setting the price of drugs, and particularly when it comes to new small molecule R&D. The fact is that we know for a fact that 9 years is not enough for anyone to recoup or to create a profit. If you look at Jeffries and others, they've said that in the first 9 years of a product life cycle, you only get 50% of your total revenues, and it's year 10 through 14 where you get the second half of your total revenues, as well as the bulk of your profit. And the last thing, I would say is causing pressure on the industry is that we do a horrible job of articulating the true value of our innovations to patients and society, whereas the payers do a very good job of saying that drugs aren't worth it. And so I think that's another area that we're working on that I can amplify on a little bit.
Okay. And I think we're going to explore that a little bit further in a little bit. But I wanted to move on to licensings and M&As and maybe start off with David. I saw Ipsen had a June 2023 deal with Medicia to develop candidates for rare disease. The company also acquired Albireo last year, Epizyme in 2022. There was a pretty sizable oncology preclinical stage deal with Marengo. How do you go about finding the companies and the technologies in which you want to invest? Can you take us through your process?
Sure, yeah, and I'd be happy to. So on Ipsen, we're very much on a journey to build a new pipeline for the company. Ipsen's a 94-year-old company at this point, and we've been quite successful from a business development standpoint. We've added about 20 new assets across our 3 therapeutic areas of oncology, rare disease, and neuroscience in the past 3 years or so, and we intend to continue the business development activities at a really good pace to build the pipeline for the company for the future. For us, where we start is really with a very clear strategy and a firm idea about what we think the right fit for us as Ipsen is. We're a 5,000 person company. We have very good resources, but we also know that we're not a Novartis, we're not a AstraZeneca, pick your favorite large pharma company. So we're deliberately by design not trying to directly compete in the same spaces as those organizations. And then, so we've done a lot of work thinking about what the right areas are for us within those therapeutic areas. Within rare disease, we began with a franchise in bone. We've recently expanded that into a franchise in liver. Now we're looking to see what additional spaces, both within and beyond those areas, would be the right fit for us. Within neuroscience, we have a long-standing history in neurotoxins, and we're looking for opportunities where we can further add to what we're doing in that space, but also in rare neurological indications. And then within oncology, we have a history with somatostatin and cabametics and other agents. We're looking to add both hematological and solid tumor programs to the portfolio. Beyond the strategy, we really then look, as I mentioned earlier on, for the right science, for the right then commercial potential, knowing that we're trying to deliver programs in places where we're not deliberately going out to compete with large pharma companies. We're looking to carve out a different niche for ourselves there. And then also look for really the partnerships that we look to prioritize are the ones where we really feel that we can add something to the partner other than just the financial. So we're always looking for what the the less quantifiable part of the relationship is we find that we've had some very long partnerships, and if we reflect on those are the ones that we really are looking to build in for the future. From a process standpoint, we have a team that very proactively goes out and hunts for opportunities that are aligned with what were our strategic priorities. But we also do a lot of work with the usual, banks, VCs, other, academic groups, conferences, other patient groups, other sources in order to identify suitable deal flow for ourselves.
Rochelle,
if I can jump in,
Sure.
I was just gonna comment, David, because I think it's so important that companies like Ipsen are still investing in rare disease. I think we've been watching over the last year or 2 years a kind of movement away from those programs from the bigger companies. Of course, they've got huge patent cliffs. There's no 1 or 10 or even 100 rare disease programs that are going to fill the gap of a Humira. So, thinking about what is that, what is the reshaping of the set of strategic partners, of, the other types of investors for rare disease programs, I think is, something that is still kind of underway. And, those needs of those patients aren't going to go away. I'm absolutely confident that the investment will be there, but there is definitely a shift. And I think, kind of trying to find those right best partners now for these rare disease programs is important. And we've seen a lot of rare disease programs shut down over the last year or two because of this lack of financing. So it's been a pretty challenging time. And I think, it'll be important for us to kind of get that resettled as quickly as possible to ensure that the investment is still there.
Yeah, no, and it's a really, really important point. If I could just come back, remember 95% of rare diseases still have no effective treatment. It gets a lot less research funding than other areas. There are some, legislative challenges potentially emerging, making rare disease research less attractive than it currently has been. Maybe Peter could comment on that, but it's really, really important that we continue to strongly advocate for rare disease, given the number of people affected.
And Rochelle, your company is eligible for a priority review voucher? So that's
right. Yeah. So Karen, I think, that I'm glad you raised it, because this is one of the great incentives that are out there for, focusing on rare disease programs. Now, certainly, you need to be able to bring the pediatric indication to approval as your first approval. So if you've got an asset like ours, where we expect it's, potentially multiple indications, it's important to bring the pediatric one first. For what that means for us, so rare pediatric disease designation, as many of you know, does give you a variety of benefits, but the one that is most important, really, to especially to pre-commercial companies, is this access to a priority review voucher at approval, and those are interesting to keep and use if you're a larger company, but usually a smaller company would look at monetizing that, and those have been selling roughly around $100 million. So I always say, if you look at a rare disease program, there aren't very many that can say, hey, on day one of after the approval, you really could monetize this priority review voucher and have $100 million straight to the bottom line. It takes a while to get there from a commercialization standpoint for any rare disease program. So it is a really important benefit. And we've noticed that obviously investors care a lot about that. We get a lot of questions about it. And they do care because it does take some of the risk off the table for the commercialization.
Okay, good. So Peter, we have a system of partnering that has worked very well for our industry for many, many years. But are there threats to deal making right now? What are the opportunities for change?
So one, I'll defer to Tim on the actual hard numbers and analysis, but I think qualitatively, there are two real challenges that are out there, which is one, a basic misunderstanding of how the public and private sector work together to develop new medicines. There's a misconception out there that somehow the NIH discovers and develops drugs, and all of a sudden a private company will just take that recipe and sell it at a high profit. There's that misunderstanding of how public and private work together, whereas in reality, it's really basic research creates sort of a base camp that then private R&D funds a number of different climbing teams to try and reach the summit and overcome all the adversities of scientific R&D. There's a lack of understanding about how new drugs are developed. There's also a lack of, or potentially willful misunderstanding that it's not about can you recruit the profit of on one drug. It's really about can you make profit on a portfolio of drugs that you're investing in. And I think oftentimes you see policymakers focus in on, well, there's this one drug that was developed, and this is how much they've made. This is how much it costs to print the pill, and this is what the acceptable profits should be, just like they do it in the UK and other places. Where in reality, investors are thinking about a portfolio of drugs that they're investing in. Can they make a profit on that portfolio? Hopefully, they're all blockbusters, but the reality is they're not. And so, feeling that the regulatory world is going to look at future blockbusters from a perspective of one successful drug versus all the risk that's taken place over the portfolio products is something that also I think is, creates trepidation. And then we can talk about small versus molecule, I think, next.
Yep, that's coming up. But I wanted to ask Tim about the M&A pace right now. Is it moving slower than 2023? Is there still a lot of interest from big pharma? And what about these FTC probes? Is everyone still on high alert since the challenge to the Amgen Horizon merger last year?
Great question. So by our calculations, M&A volume is down this year in terms of the dollar amount, which you have to kind of remind yourself of, though, is last year about this time we saw Pfizer announce the acquisition of Seagen. So, the Seagen deal alone, dollar-wise, is more than all of the deals that have been announced this year. So for all I know, there's a big acquisition tomorrow morning would change the conclusion quite a bit. There is still brisk volume that's underway. And yeah, I mean, the FTC is a significant barrier to those larger Seagen-like deals. For, someone wanted to buy Rochelle's company or, another sort of mid-size or small cap biotech, there's generally not a ton of barrier out there. Although interestingly, I think the FTC spoke up about a licensing deal last year, which surprised me. But in general, the presence of a activist FTC has been a hindrance to M&A in our industry.
Well, also, we saw a lot of deal making in obesity last year, a lot of partnering in ADCs, RNAs, cell therapies. What other areas might we see interest in 2024? What are the meaningful markets for drug developers right now?
There's three big areas. So first and foremost, I would say that oncology remains pretty high, and ADCs, T-cell engagers are still of high interest. In other categories, I think companies need to show up with data in general, or, there are certain mechanisms where there's just a lot of interest. So for example, everyone's looking for a competitive pan-KRAS inhibitor or a KRAS-D inhibitor. And so, if you had one of those, I think you wouldn't have trouble getting a deal done. The neuroscience area is really heating up quite a bit. So we saw some neuroscience M&A last year, but also there's tremendous interest in neuroscience licensing at the moment. And then cardiometabolic remains high. So obesity is certainly front and center, but there's actually so much interest in, novel approaches to blood pressure, heart failure, even atherosclerosis. So it's in many ways a golden era for innovation in those fields. And I think there's tremendous industry interest. There's less industry interest, I would say, in two areas. First are sort of traditional ology fields. So think of like, urology, those kind of areas. There's probably less innovation and interest going on. And the second is platform technologies. So, there are countless companies that call us up all the time. Hey, we have a new approach to gene editing or protein degradation. Can you go find us platform partners? Those deals are actually quite hard to do, and there are relatively few people doing transactions in those fields.
Okay. I wanted to sort of shift to the next section of our discussion, challenges and opportunities for change. And of course, I thought we'd start off talking about drug pricing. I know, Peter, you've addressed some of this already about how the IRA can affect the industry. What can you tell us about the concerns that are out there? And, have you seen dropping investments in small molecules, early stage companies working on aging therapies? And this is also where there were a couple of questions from our audience regarding what can be done to eliminate the IRA 9-year price control discrimination, or how is progress going with the bill to fix the small molecule discrimination in the IRA?
Thank you. And absolutely, there's been no question that the IRA has had a chilling effect on new small molecule R&D and the ability for development stage companies to attract financing for new, clinical stage R&D. And we've had some of our folks do informal surveys with venture capitalists where they've found that 90% of venture capitalists have said they're reducing the amount of funding they're giving to new small molecules, particularly for diseases of aging. We've also found that a lot of small molecule companies are being asked, can you turn this? This is a great idea. It would do a tremendous impact on patients. Can you do it through a large molecule versus a small molecule because of the IRA? And from a practical standpoint, that's just pure silliness. Because if you think about it, even though large molecules are just as risky to innovate, a small molecule, is easier to manufacture, does not require a physician to administer, is interchangeable at the pharmacy with a generic, and the generic can be basically genericized overnight, whereas a biosimilar has a bunch more regulatory hurdles. So from a big picture perspective, we're seeing this decline in new small molecule R&D. The interest in folks trying to solve these problems, not by ceasing them altogether, but potentially looking towards large molecules as the way to solve the problem, which is completely inefficient, prevents folks from following the science. And by the way, the IRA did not cap Part B as in boy out-of-pocket costs. It only capped pretty much small molecule out-of-pocket costs. So you see these perverse incentives, unintended consequences that are resulting from the Inflation Reduction Act. And what we've been trying to do is, one, thanks to, I think, a lot of folks on this call, trying to educate Congress around, maybe misunderstanding the impact of IRA by underestimating the impact on new innovation and overestimating the potential cost savings. So we've just recently had a letter with about 400 investors and small companies representing about 600 plus new medicines, urging CBO to fix how they understand the impact of this bill. What we'd also like to see is that, there has been, as someone mentioned, legislation that's been introduced to fix this inequity. I think that's something we all need to work to build support on for something that potentially could be added post-election and Medicare omnibus. And what can we do now today to build support for these efforts, whether it's by highlighting, as they're going to do in the Energy Commerce Committee tomorrow that Rochelle will speak to, about how small molecules are rare disease products as well, and that if you fix the small molecule issue, you're helping the rare disease indications as well. And then the last thing I would say is, while we work on fixing the unintended consequences of the IRA, we also have to stay laser focused on improving the affordability for the patient or the consumer at the pharmacy. And that's not only by enacting PBM reform to ensure savings are passed on to the consumer, but also looking at other market segments to ensure that there's proper insurance there. For example, by extending the $2,000 out-of-pocket cap from Medicare Part D to Medicare Part B, and even to ACA exchange plans, where that would be something very easily for the government to implement.
Okay. Rochelle, I wanted to ask you, this is Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill. The House Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee is holding a legislative hearing tomorrow focused on proposals that support patients with rare diseases. So what do you hope comes out of that hearing?
Yeah, I think it's every year, this is a pretty exciting time because there's, not only the specifics that are being discussed during these types of meetings, but and the convergence on Capitol Hill is pretty impressive. But with that, there's a lot of energy and then awareness that's raised around very specific challenges for rare disease families, for drug developers and many others in the ecosystem. So I do think it's a really important week for, just advancing things more quickly than would happen otherwise. A couple of things that we've got our eye on. One is the renewal of the priority review voucher program. So that one is important again, in terms of thinking about the attractiveness, the financial attractiveness of investing in one of these programs. So that one, we'd like to make sure is something that's successful. And the other thing is, back to the IRA, thinking about this kind of penalty, if you will, for drugs that may be pipelined in a product. And I know that goes in and out of fashion, but the reality is some products just are inherently, they have potential to address many, many diseases. And, if we think about that, from an overall resource allocation in the industry, that's smart. You've already proved the manufacturing, you're building better data sets and safety data sets, and, taking each additional indication to the finish line and getting that out to patients is a lower investment. So, we think that that's the right thing to do, but there are some, I think I have to believe folks didn't understand what was, the potential outcome if they start doing price controls on drugs where you've got more than one indication, more than one rare disease approved for that one drug. So we'd like to see that removed. I just in my own experience on Capitol Hill, I think that will be handled. I have seen a lot of support, no matter which side of the aisle, for doing the right thing for rare disease patients. So I think that, I'm not worried about it per se, but to Peter's point, we do need to make sure that that happens, and we do that through our active engagement in the process.
So, Tim, Senator Sanders continues to go after drug pricing. He brought the CEOs of Merck and J&J under threat of subpoena and the CEO of Bristol Myers to testify before the Health Committee a few weeks ago. As part of this meeting, drug prices were compared to prices in other countries. Why is there such a difference? Is it the PBMs, the middlemen? What can be done in the US to tackle this perception?
It's a good question. I mean, I think Senator Sanders candidly is a little bit misguided. I think Peter made the key argument. So if you ex post, pick out a successful drug, Humira, say, you look at that, say like, oh my goodness, look at all the profits that these guys are making. And oh, by the way, they're selling it for a lot less in this other country. Well, it's really the US market that is providing the support for the innovation that led to Humira in the first place. Just because it's cheaper in Canada doesn't mean that you're price gouging in the US. It simply means that you're only able to recover the investment in the United States market. And so, Sanders somehow is making these companies sound evil or misguided or excessively capitalistic. He uses the word greed, which is a very loaded term. I assume everyone is trying to make a profit. Is that greed? The real question, I think, it is a very different one, which is, does the United States have the political will to support this industry? And I was actually struck by, frankly, the relatively mild comments that the CEOs made in the hearing. No one just stopped and said, hey, Sanders, this is a conversation about our appetite for innovation. Do we want to support innovation in this country or not? What people are paying for Humira in Mexico or Canada is really a red herring. It's not the issue.
I also wanted to ask David, has the IRA and other drug pricing concerns played into your decision-making at Ipsen? Has it changed your strategy at all for deals?
Sure. So I think, our view is very similar to, Tim and Peter, in that the IRAs that we believe is going to have some significant implications for innovation in the longer term. Specifically for us as a company that is not, we're not in the market where we anticipate being sort of in the first wave of the negotiations. Our sort of near-term impact of the IRA on our current portfolio we believe to be relatively low, but that doesn't sort of diminish its importance, and it certainly hasn't sort of diminished our thinking as we've started to work through how do we think about small molecules versus other modalities, how do we start modeling the potential impact for IRA in forecasts and business cases when we look for new business development activities. And we've been quite active in sort of conversations with the industry as to how to work that through. So we're very hopeful, along with Rochelle and others, that the country does have the willingness to do the right thing to try to fix this, be good for innovation in the longer term.
Okay. And this is a question for everyone. Back in December, a draft framework was released to help federal agencies decide whether to exercise a federal march-in on patent rights, protecting taxpayer-supported drugs and other inventions. And the framework said price was going to be one of the factors in determining whether a product is reasonably available. Then also during the COVID pandemic, there was the World Trade Organization's IP waiver for vaccines. So how can companies ensure protection of their IP in this environment? Does anyone want to address that?
I mean, Karen, it's the same conversation. It's just dressed in a different outfit. So at the end of the day, does the US government want to support innovation or not? And so, the threat to exercise patent march-in rights that are conditional on pricing is just another way of saying, hey, drug prices are too high. And I think Peter's group has really been the one that's made the point so well, which is there's massive positive social externalities in the United States and for other countries that are coming off of this innovation, right? I mean, 24 months ago, the world was, facing an existential crisis to a virus that our industry dealt with. Thankfully, we did have the innovative capacity to deal with that virus. And the whole march-in right things is just, it's from my perspective at least, it's political hot air in an election year to draw voters' attention to pricing misdeeds in the pharmaceutical sector.
Just to echo Tim, which is one, it's very frustrating to have these distracting debates that won't really have a meaningful impact on patients, families, and overall U.S. consumers. So the march-in rights debate, the TRIPS debate in a least developed countries where they don't even have to comply with existing patents, those are all distractions to try and, as Tim said, highlight the pricing issues without really thinking about what are the solutions to help people here in the U.S. and abroad. And so that's something over working 20 plus years in this area, it's like there are folks who hate the biotech industry more than they want to help patients, and that's very frustrating and a waste of time, energy, and effort. There's a lot of interest right now in both parties around what is the future of the U.S. competitiveness looking like vis-a-vis China. And one of the frustrating conversations is they're saying, "Oh my God, China is going to overtake the U.S. How could that possibly be when it comes to biotech?" It's like, well, if you price control new drugs before they can, make a profit, if you say we're not going to require insurers provide proper insurance at low out-of-pocket costs, if you're not going to stand up for U.S. innovation overseas, then before you know it, we're going to fall behind. And 10 years from now, we're going to say, how do we fall behind? Just like we fell behind on antibiotics, and it's going to take another 10, 15 years to find out how to fix it. So rather than let's all save ourselves 25 years of pain and suffering and think about how can we have positive solutions today that not only ensures continued competitiveness, not only better understands the true value of medicines, but also ensures that there's a way for folks to access through proper insurance the treatments that are prescribed to them by their provider.
You know, if I can just add, Peter, I think one of the things that we try to focus on, and I'm a firm believer in, is we have to do a good job of articulating the value of our very specific drugs and drug programs as well. I mean, we talk a lot about the kind of theoretical benefits, which are clearly there. But from company to company, I think being able to really articulate what value you're bringing is incredibly important. And I think, I think back to the last company I led is called Enzivant Therapeutics. We had we got FDA approval for and launched a drug to treat about 20 kids per year in the US. So that's clearly a tiny patient population. And what was really important to, I mean, you could do the math quickly. This is not an easy economic story. So we had to be really creative on many fronts. But, being able to articulate very clearly the benefits that could bring to patients was really the pathway to success. And despite, of course, needing to price that at, I'll call it a high price. That was not at all, there was no pushback on that price because of that value discussion. And I think, I would add, because we talk a lot about investors and the shareholders and the benefits to shareholders and returns to shareholders, but there are other stakeholders we're serving as well. And I think you need to articulate the benefits across those, whether it's the healthcare system, it's hospitals that you're working with, or whoever else is in that ecosystem, and being able to really ensure that you've got a point of view on that so that you've got a sustainable business as well. So I just think we should get a little bit better at that, and we shouldn't shy away from it. And that will be helpful as well.
Just
Okay.
real quick, I know
Sure.
I just wanted to do one quick plug, which is for those folks, to Rochelle's point, that are thinking about how do we articulate and value the medicine that we have in development. There are folks out there like ICER and NICE in the UK that want to put together a math equation that says your drug's not worth it to patients in society. We're doing a lot of research and peer-reviewed research to help improve what that math looks like so it can better convey it. So if you have questions about your product or how it can be helpful, to at least do a cost effectiveness analysis that incorporates sort of real world patient societal benefits, please reach out to me. We can help you do a better job or think about how to fully articulate the value of your medicine to your future patients and consumers.
That's great.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted, we need to move into the Q&A section, but I wanted to give you each maybe 15 seconds each just to tell us, what's your earnest hope for the industry this year? What would you like our listeners to have as a takeaway from this discussion? Anyone want to start?
I think we're looking at a recovering market, and it would be my hope that market recovery, as we talked at the very beginning, really goes all the way down to the smaller and emerging companies. Many of those companies are the ones that are the real innovators. They're the ones, frankly, that are most impacted by some of the legislative factors that we've discussed today. And so hopefully this will turn out to be a good year for those players.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I think it's definitely been challenging, and we've been through a lot of, I'll call it transformation over the last couple of years. I think we will emerge stronger. I think we will emerge more disciplined, and I think that's going to be better for the industry. It's going to be better for patients. So I'm looking forward to the next era that really benefits from some of the challenges that we've experienced.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're looking forward to a good, strong recovery, and also an exciting year for deal making across the industry.
The only thing I would add is just as the environment improves, I would also encourage you, everyone, to get involved, to be ready to share your story with authenticity and the anecdote We have something called a first responder network where you can, not only get updates from us, but also sign letters like we did recently to the CBO. Because, without that authenticity and specificity, folks are just going to treat us like it's Bernie Sanders versus a large blockbuster, as opposed to all the real hard work that everybody does on this call and listening in, and be able to share that story and to be able to stand up for ourselves, so that once the opportunity exists for fixes, that we can all work together to make sure they get across the finish line.
I'll hand it over to Lila for Q&A now.
Well, thank you, Karen and Rochelle, David and Tim and Peter, for this very relevant, timely, and deep discussion. I have two questions that I would like to put forward. The first is, a rising tide rises all ships. But with this recovery, when we're looking at things globally, whether it be Europe and the US, Canada, and other regions, and different therapeutic areas and also different stages of development, do you think there will be any areas that maybe lag a little bit in their benefit with the recovery?
Lila, I'm going to respond to a metaphor with a different metaphor. So it is true that a rising tide lifts all boats, but imagine a desert that's been in a drought and all of a sudden the rain comes back. So that's sort of what we're seeing right now. So we're seeing the public markets recover really strongly, huge amount of investor interest in public stocks, but privates, as we spoke earlier, are still very much behind. And then, the smaller private companies, many of whom are represented on today's call as listeners, I think are particularly in a challenging situation, although it depends on the circumstances of each company. What happens after, a drought is, at first the rivers are almost overflowing, but, there's still a lot of plants that aren't getting necessarily what they need, the nutrition. And what you see is it actually takes years for a full recovery of an ecosystem after a drought. And that's essentially, I think, what's going to happen here. It will be quite a long time for the damage that's been done to our ecosystem, which has involved, the combination of inflation and unwise political decision-making at the same time. So it's going to be a couple of years for this damage to be undone.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question. Actually, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Tim, but if we were to convene this same exact virtual salon 1 year from now, what do you think some of the things we would be talking about would be? And I mean that in a hopeful way.
What President Trump's going to be doing to the IRA.
Anybody else? Peter?
I just think it's a mixed bag because, on the one hand, if President Trump's doing the IRA, is he also implementing, immediate price controls through drug importation and international pricing? So it's, regardless of what the environment, how the environment shifts, the more that we can do together to prepare for that environmental shift is really, and talk about all the progress we've made and telling our story and showcasing the value of our innovations. That hopefully is something we're talking about, no matter whether it's Biden or Trump.
And one of the things I'm interested in watching is we've obviously had a number of programs shelved over the last couple of years. Probably some rightly so, others just by necessity. And so I'm a little bit curious how that's going to play out. And will we be rolling up companies and building out pipelines, by searching around for these programs that have been put on the shelf? I don't know. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens from an innovation standpoint.
We just got another question in. By the way, audience, if you would like to type in additional questions to the Q&A, please go ahead. Tony asks, has any of the panelists seen the stage of development of biotech asset change for deal making during the last 2 years? So in other words, are we looking for earlier assets, later assets, and what can we see or expect to see moving forward?
So there's really been actually a decrease in deal making. So Karen talked about the statistics. of these billion-dollar plus deals, which are in fact up. But if you look at the volume of licensing and partnering activity, it's actually down and down significantly. And that's driven in large part by what's happened to these smaller and mid-size companies. And what we're seeing right now is definite interest in mid-size and late-stage assets being higher. And then for earlier stage assets, it's very much dependent on the mechanism of action of the drug. So for example, before I mentioned, KRAS G12D, people are looking for something, or KRAS, pan drugs are of interest. But in general, it's actually been more difficult to license earlier stage drugs. And I wouldn't doubt that that is related in part to what's happened politically in the United States.
Yeah, I think our experience with that has been similar to Tim's. We've seen, more focus for deal making on clinical stage assets, and particularly de-risked clinical assets, a little bit more of a best in class versus first in class approach. We'll see how that evolves, but that sort of seems to have been the focus, at least recently.
Any final comments before we end this truly excellent salon?
I think something that is really important, and Peter touched on a little bit, is what's going on in our industry in China. So China's had this just huge investment in innovation, and yet interestingly, the Chinese market is smaller than the US market. And so Chinese companies need to license their assets out. And so if you look at the licensing activity, while overall licensing activity is down, China to West licensing activity is up massively. And that's going to continue. And that's because Chinese companies are developing really good mid-stage assets and are ready to let them go. The same asset, if it held by a US biotech company or a European biotech company, they would typically not choose to license it out.
Well, thank you again to all the panelists, and thank you for answering the questions from the audience. That's all the time we have for today. I also want to thank Biotech Gate Digital Partnering for their support. We would also like to thank our audience, as always, for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us for future Demy-Colton virtual salons. Details for that will be posted on our website. Thank you so much today to everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.